Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Morning, and thanks for having me.
Excellent. We will now start with our interview questions, and once they're completed, we'll move on to the live Q&A. So, firstly, so the young people listening can get to know you, please could you tell us about your career journey and current role?
So it takes me back quite a while, but I think my career journey really started when I was about 15 or 16. When I was still obviously studying at school, I had an interest at that time, I guess, in sciences and in healthcare. So I was fortunate enough to get into medical school. And whilst I knew a bit about medicine when I first started, I have to say I perhaps wasn't as informed as I should have been, but I was really fortunate that I went to medical school and had a really great time as a student and learned a lot. And then my career started in the NHS, and I trained to become, well, I had two trainings really. I had training to become an intensive care consultant and an anaesthetic consultant. And so once I finished my training in hospitals, I then started to become a more senior doctor. And through that training, I did a number of different things. I had a great opportunity. So I managed to be really fortunate and work in Australia for a year, which was a really great experience. And then a bit later in my career, I also managed to work in America for a year. And again, an amazing experience, and learned so much more about different cultures and different ways that the healthcare system can work. And then once I became a senior doctor, I then had a meeting with a friend who literally just started to work in the ambulance sector, and they had just started and said it was just an amazing organisation, an amazing part of the NHS to work in. And so they sort of invited me to come and shadow them for a few days, and in the end I ended up applying for a job in the medical as a medical director in the ambulance service. And so my career has been quite different and quite varied, and I've been very fortunate. But what I would say is that the job I'm doing now is by far the best job I've ever done. It's been the hardest job I've ever done, but by far the best job I've ever done. I absolutely love it. And so I think, reflecting on from when I've been starting my career at 16 to where I am now, I think I've just, I guess I would summarise by saying I've just been really fortunate that I've worked with a load of really brilliant people, both inside and outside the NHS. And then currently the job I do, as I say, is by far the best thing I've ever done in my career.
That's fantastic to hear that your qualifications enabled you to travel the world and work around the world. That is really lovely to hear. But kind of following on, what made you pursue a career in the ambulance service? What was it about the ambulance service that sort of pulled you away?
I think the actual real reason is that before I joined the ambulance service, and I was a pretty senior clinician, I was pretty experienced. My own family, my daughter, needed the ambulance service. So while she's luckily made full recovery and is really well now, we needed to phone 999 on a number of occasions. And it made me really realise that sadly at times, sometimes we all need help when we're at our most vulnerable, and but sometimes we're really kind of frightened. And whilst I was, as I say, a really experienced clinician, when it's your own family and you're totally dependent on others to come and help you, you kind of realise just how important the 999 service can be. And so I kind of had first-hand experience as a father and as I guess a sort of a patient in that sense of the 999 services. And I remember saying to my wife, or my wife reminds me, I did say, if I ever had the opportunity to work in the ambulance service, I think I could, I'd really enjoy it. And I think I could help. And then by sheer fortune, this friend said, come and have a look at the ambulance service, and then a job appeared. So I don't think I ever set out necessarily. I didn't really know I wanted to do this job. But I think the combination of the skills that I'd already had, and also my own experience of what it feels like to need the ambulance service, just came together. And so that, I guess, is the real reason. I think, like lots of people, they have good and bad experiences, and sometimes that inspires people to want to do a job. And that's really my story as well. It's from a personal experience.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely brought it home about the importance of the ambulance service for you. And speaking of the ambulance service, what do you find most rewarding about your work?
The most rewarding thing about what the things I do is actually the people that do the job alongside me. So most jobs, there's a degree of not repetition, but the jobs are sometimes quite challenging, and you don't always do the things you want to do in them. But what makes the difference, in my opinion, about a brilliant job and a job that maybe not be quite so good is the people you work with. And so almost all the people that I work with are really committed and dedicated and kind and funny, and you get that in a lot of organizations. I'm not saying that it's just in the ambulance service you have that, but the ambulance service does have a lot of people who are really committed and really value it and understand why it's there. So I think the best part of my job is seeing each day just how many people are working to try and make it better, and to try and improve stuff, and to try and help the public. And then, of course, besides the brilliant people, you do get to work with the public. And we, again, are really fortunate that pretty much everybody that wants us and needs us is really grateful when we help them, either on the phone or when we physically arrive in wherever they are, at home, or whether they're involved in an accident. And so when you get there, the sense that when you arrive, the public are relieved and they're gratefully there. And they're, sometimes obviously it's really distressing situations, but it's a remarkable privilege to be able to go and help others. And it's remarkable privilege to sort of see people, who are really at times struggling and having awful experiences. And if you can help them in those really difficult situations, then whilst the job can be really quite stressful, and there's a lot of pressure on the ambulance service, being able to help others when they need us, is an absolute privilege. So I guess they're the two things, that the people I work with, and also that the public that that I try and help.
Absolutely. So kind of following on from, going into these high risk situations sometimes, how do you feel when you are, being called into a high risk situation? How do you prepare yourself for it?
One thing about the ambulance service is that we're really aware that sometimes we are going into really difficult situations. So not all of our work involves life-threatening situations, but that's part of the job we do. So it's really important that we are well trained, and it's really important that we support one another. So in really difficult situations, you'll see quite often, or on an ambulance, there's always at least two of us. But on really difficult situations where it's really challenging, we'll send more than two clinicians. And sometimes you'll see us on rapid response vehicles. They're the cars, and we try put senior clinicians on those cars so that they can go and help. So the first thing we do is try and work as a team. And the second thing we do is we are very mindful that actually we need to look after ourselves. So when we do see and treat patients in really quite difficult circumstances, we're very aware that obviously it's really difficult for the patients, but it can have an impact on us. So I think over the last few years, we're much better now at talking about our own mental health, and talking about how we support one another, and how we do things like kind of debrief, so where we talk about the things we've seen and the patients we've cared for. So I think we're much better now at working as a team and supporting each other. And I think we're also much better after treating patients that have been pretty challenging. We're much better now at talking about it and making sure that we don't then take some of those difficult things home with us, and we don't let those really difficult things play in our minds and make us unwell. So I think there are a number of things we do, but it is our job to go and help people in difficult situations. So we just have to be mindful that that is part and parcel of being a frontline part of the ambulance service.
That's great that you are now not only focusing on helping others, but you're also focusing on helping yourself, with your own mental health and well-being. As you said, is extremely important after you go into a high-risk situation to then debrief and make sure that your own mental health and well-being is okay and good. So talking about your day-to-day, what does a real day-to-day look like in the ambulance service?
So there's a huge number of different roles in our ambulance service, but if we focus perhaps on what most people expect from us, which is when we're on ambulances, first of all, they're pretty long days. For example, I'm doing a shift tomorrow with a paramedic on an ambulance, and that's a 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night shift. So it's the longest shift we do, which is a 12-hour shift. So we arrive pretty early, so we need to be there to make sure that the ambulance is checked. So we'll be there by just after 5:30 in the morning. So it's a pretty early start. And the first thing we'll do is just we'll check everything on that vehicle. So we need to make sure we've got the right equipment, that we've got the right drugs, and that the ambulance itself is safe to use. So the first bit we do is make ourselves safe. And then pretty much as soon as we're ready, the day will start, and our brilliant colleagues who work in they're called our contact centres, our control rooms. So that's the area where the calls come in, and then the brilliant teams in there work out how to get the ambulances to the patients. Usually our radio will start and they'll send us the first patient that needs us. And the day will be really varied, and that's what I love about the job. So we literally can go to kind of anybody and with any clinical condition. So we will go to literally somebody who's just given birth. So we could be treating a newborn baby, because sometimes when women are having babies, they don't quite get to hospital. The baby comes quicker than they planned. So we can be, literally Sunday seeing somebody who's literally been born. And then the other extreme, we can go to patients, in their 90s, who are maybe at home or maybe in a care home, who've got kind of other medical needs. So we literally can see from newborns to 90, 100-year-olds, and then we see all sorts of different presentations. So yes, we will see people who've got immediately life-threatening conditions, but most of our work actually is people who are still really sick, but luckily not quite life-threatening, but they can be really sick. So they're people who might have, say, heart attacks or strokes. But also we see a lot of other patients that need us who have mental health problems, who we go and see, or they've had falls, or they've got difficulty in breathing. So there's pretty much no patient, no medical condition that we aren't involved in, and that's what can make the job really fascinating and really kind of varied, because literally no day is the same, and literally no patient is the same. And as I say, we go mainly into where people are, so they're often their homes. Obviously we can see people if they're out shopping or they're out in a car, but most of the patients we see are sick and in their homes. So we get to sort of travel across big parts of our area, which is the northwest of England. So as I say, the days are really varied, and pretty much by the time you've finished that long shift, you are really tired. So you're pretty grateful that when the day's finishing, you get to pack up and get home.
Absolutely. What an extremely varied day, and a very long but rewarding day, as you said. So given your experience, what advice do you have for those who aspire to take on leadership roles in healthcare organizations, such as becoming a medical director?
That's a great question. I don't think when I first started, I ever thought I would end up doing a job like this. And I think my advice really would be is that, like most things in life, you've got to sort of try and do things that interest you. And sometimes that's difficult, because when you start off, it's not really always clear how your interests match jobs. But those people, I think, that are still enjoying the jobs they do, have managed to find a way that they match their own interests and the job. And I've always been really fortunate that I think I've always found something that I really love to do. And I think in terms of leadership, I think the most important thing that I've got to remember about my own job is that my job is to help everybody else. So you shouldn't try and become a medical director or a head teacher or the chief exec of a company just for the sake of it. If you want to get those sort of jobs, you should remind yourself that really the reason you do those jobs is to make it easy for everybody else. So my job is to make sure that everybody else, the frontline paramedics and our technicians and our call handlers, my job is to try and make it easier and better and safer for them to do their jobs. And that's the job of being a leader, is doing everything you can to make it better for others. And you shouldn't be doing leadership jobs for your own ego, or because you think it makes yourself important, because that usually doesn't make you make good decisions, and it usually sometimes kind of attracts the wrong people. So I think, whilst I'm not saying I'm perfect, and quite like the opposite, I think when I looked at other leaders and sort of watched what they do and how they behave, it was really quite telling to me, because they were always trying to think about others, they were always trying to be kind, and they were always trying to be as understanding of others as they possibly can. So I think that's my advice. And when I'm struggling with the job I do, and I ask my mentors and I ask the people I respect, that's the sort of advice they've always given me.
That's great. People can hear from you, and as you said, when they go into a field or work, maybe they can find a mentor too that they look up to and ask for their advice as well. So thank you for that. Moving on now to qualities and skills. What do you think are the most important qualities and skills in healthcare that young people can work on now in order to succeed?
So I think the straight answer I'm going to give to that is essentially it's all about relationships. So to me, whilst obviously there's a really important part of training and education and the kind of the skills that we have in healthcare, and even though we're getting using much more technology and we're using all sorts of different complicated machinery and drugs, the bottom line is that we're treating people who are sick, and that's a really important thing to really remember. And when you're sick, you don't feel good about yourself, and you feel frightened, and you feel vulnerable, and you can be worried, or you can be angry. And so it doesn't matter how high tech we get in healthcare, the fundamental basic is that we are helping one another. And so I think the most important skill set that I hope I've got when I'm practicing clinically, but also the teams that we want to work in the healthcare settings, are people who can walk in others' shoes. So, it's really important not to judge people. It's really important not to bring your own biases into when you're interacting with people. It's really important to treat people as individuals and respect their values and their beliefs. So I think that, as I say, the most important skill set and quality is empathy and understanding and tolerance and kindness, because you can learn all the other skills. You can learn what drugs to use. You can learn how to help somebody in a cardiac arrest. But the most important skills that we really want, either in the ambulance service or in the wider NHS, is people who can truly understand and empathise with the people that they're caring for.
Yes, and so perhaps for a CV, what would sort of demonstrate people's skills or empathy?
I think there's lots of different ways that people can sort of demonstrate that. I know it's not always easy to sort of get into various volunteering roles, but there's a lot of community work out there that can be helped, I think is related to healthcare. So there are a lot of voluntary services out there. There are care homes, and there are all sorts of different ways that people can demonstrate that they kind of understand those who are maybe different than them, or those who are more, who are struggling. So we know a lot about those communities that don't have the same resources that I do, that are vulnerable or suffering from kind of lack of money or all sorts of other challenges. And there's different ways we can help those. So we know there's things like food banks, we know there's volunteering services that are helping. And I think if you can try and work with those and see people and engage with them and understand them, then you really get an insight to what the different communities need. And so I think when you're potentially considering a career in healthcare, I think as I say, that'd be a really good way. If I was reading somebody's CV and I'd seen that they tried to look at different parts of communities, something that was different than them, and they had various experiences, and they'd spoken to people who were, both young and old, and different ethnicities, and people who had different challenges. I think that would show to me somebody who's really genuinely interested in sort of seeing, the world from other people's eyes, and also, demonstrating those qualities we've discussed, which is about empathy and understanding and kindness.
Thank you, Chris. We'll move on to one last question before student questions. What roles are available in the NHS ambulance service other than a paramedic that people may not be aware of, and what are the routes into them?
So yeah, that's a really good question, because a lot of people know that the major role we have in our service is paramedics, but we have a lot of other roles. So on our ambulances, we have some brilliant colleagues who are called emergency medical technicians, EMTs, and they are really skilled and really valued, but they haven't come through a traditional university post. They've gone through either an apprenticeship route, or they've gone through one of our training programs. So that's a certainly really valued skill set, and they're remarkably gifted people, and they work alongside us as either doctors or paramedics. So that's one group of really valued colleagues. But then if you think through how the ambulance service works, from the moment you dial 999, there's a group of colleagues who answer the phones, and they're emergency medical advisors, and they have a really difficult and stressful job, but a brilliant job. And I know a lot of them really love their job, because they're the first people that the public speak to, and their job is really important, because they help work out what's going on, where the patients are, and then what type of response do they need. And then there's another set of colleagues that work alongside the call handler team, and they're called our dispatchers, and that's a whole nother skill set. And they're the teams who work out, well, we know where the patients are, and we know where the ambulances and the rapid response vehicles are, so how do we get the two together? And they're constantly talking to us when we're in the ambulances to tell us kind of where to go and what's happening, and update us, and we're constantly talking to them. But then there's a whole nother skill set, because as you can imagine, if we've got over 1,000 vehicles, which we do in the Northwest, we've got brilliant colleagues who are mechanics. We need to keep our vehicles on the road. We've got, on each ambulance, we need to use radios, and we all have iPads to help record what we do. So we've got a whole load of people who are brilliant in terms of technology, and then there's all sorts of other skills to run a big organization. We've got over 7,000 people working for us, so we have people who are really good finance people and accountants. We've got people who work in HR. So there's a huge number of different careers you can embark upon, and if people are interested, if you just look on our website, so if you just Google either the Northwest Ambulance Service, or it's NWAS as in NWAS. But if you just have a look at that, there's a whole page or a number of pages that kind of help people. They'll tell you about the different careers we have. They'll show you the kind of the current vacancies, but they'll also give you hints and tips about how to apply for a job, or you can talk to one of us about if you're not quite sure you've got the right qualifications, but you still want to join us, and there's different opportunities. So we're really keen to attract lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, and we have, as I say, a team out there who are really keen to help various people at different stages of your application process to work out what's the best way of coming to join us. And as I say, I'm pretty confident that people out there listening to this, if they look at that website and start talking to us, I'm pretty sure there's a role for pretty much everybody if they want to join us.
Great, thank you, Chris. We're going to move on now to the student questions. You briefly touched upon it, but the Hertfordshire and Essex High School and Science College would like to know, did you go to university or did you do an apprenticeship, and why?
It's a great question. So I'm pretty rare in the ambulance service. I'm actually a doctor, so I did go to university, but and that's I was very fortunate to do that, and that's how our paramedic colleagues now join us. But as I say, there's a lot of other ways in, and particularly apprenticeship schemes, and we also all the ambulance services have different ways of joining us, and then after a number of years, we will support you to if you want to do different things. So we will have, as I said, some of our colleagues join us as emergency medical technicians, and then after a number of years, if they want to, we can then support them to become a paramedic. So there's different ways of joining us, and we're really keen that people, who may not be able to or want to go to university, that isn't a barrier to joining us at all. In fact, as I say, there's loads of different ways of joining us. And then also there's different ways, there's different professions. So whilst most of us aren't paramedics, we've got hundreds and hundreds of nurses that work with us. We've got pharmacists that work with us. We've got midwives that work with us, and we've got mental health colleagues that work with us. So the ambulance service is changing, and as I say, as we change, we're trying to make sure that if you have a real interest in joining us, then there's lots of different routes. So as I say, if you want to go and look at the different websites and just look at the different ways of getting in to our service, because as I say, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity out there, and we're really keen to attract all sorts of different people from all sorts of backgrounds.
Thank you, Chris. And Sunderland College would like to know, what is the rate of life saved using an ambulance per year?
Wow, that's a pretty tricky question. So I think one of the most important things we do, unfortunately, have to do is when people have stopped breathing or when their heart has stopped, we do have to get to those patients really quickly. And I think what we've learned over the years is that actually the most important thing is not really what we do, it's what the public do and what you can do. So you'll see at most schools, and I'm pretty confident at your own school and college, you'll see defibrillators. So you'll see those, quite often they're yellow boxes with defibrillators on it. And actually it's what you can do that's perhaps more important than what I can do, because if you see somebody and you think that they're not breathing or you can't feel a pulse, and we all know that that's really important to start dialing 999 and tell us what you're seeing. But it's also really important that if you have the opportunity, there's a lot of first aid courses out there, and there's a lot of things that you can do either with us, with the ambulance service, where you can learn to do basic life support, where we teach you essentially how to use those defibrillators and how to do either heart compressions or to help do some basic first aid. And there's lots of different ways. We have thousands of volunteers that are trained and help us, so they will go to their local communities while we're also arriving. And so whilst we do have a really important role, actually what we've learned over the years that it's you that can make a difference. So I would say that if you are interested, talk to your local ambulance service, but also have a look and see what your own schools and colleges offer, because I'm pretty confident that they will offer, there'll be first aiders. And so, as I say, our job is to get to those people who need us. But I hope you're hearing that actually everybody can learn some basic life support. And as I say, it'd be brilliant if anybody listening to this wants to get in touch with us or with any kind of local healthcare organisation, because we'll be really keen to help you learn these skills.
That's really useful to know. And quite a sort of sensitive question, but an interesting one. Have you had a time in your career in which you feel that your patient is too hard to save? And that's from South Hunsley School and Sixth Form College.
So I think it's very clear that sometimes when we go to patients as the ambulance service, some of the patients we do treat are in really distressing and difficult situations. And our job is to always respond and go and make an assessment. Sadly, there are patients that we can't help, and that we simply won't, won't get the outcome we want. But I think the most important thing I remember is that that's a decision that we make as skilled clinicians. I think the public dial 999 because they need our help. And so it's really important that whatever the situation you find yourself in, if you think we are needed, then you call, and then we make the decision. Sadly, if the patients can't be helped, but the way I've always thought about kind of blue lights, whether it's us, the police, or the fire, is that I don't always think that the blue lights mean oh gosh, somebody's in immediate danger or something bad's happened. I try and think of it that, it's brilliant that somebody's coming to help. And so I think what we should remember is that, the blue light services are there to help people when they really, really need us. And so, yes, unfortunately, there are times when patients don't survive, but it's much more important for people to remember that if you need us, you dial 999, and then it's our job to come and help and to do the best we possibly can.
Thank you, Chris. So with regards to, we've had a question about your day-to-day life. How do you maintain, a work-life balance?
I think you might need to ask my wife and children whether I do that or not. But I think it's a really, really important point that's been made. So, like a lot of jobs, there's a lot of pressure for the ambulance service. I think people will know that the NHS is really challenged at the moment, and we're not always getting to people as quickly as we like, and that's not a good place for us to be in. But we also have to balance that out with the fact that you've heard me talk about, we can't help others if we're not helping ourselves. So it's a really important part of my job to remind myself and the rest of my colleagues that we do need to take our time off. We do need to take our holidays and our rest. We do need to look after ourselves. So what I do personally, I have a really good set of friends and colleagues at work, so I can talk about the things that are worrying me and the problems, and they also will recognise when I'm perhaps tired and perhaps a little bit grumpy, and when they need to say, are you okay? And I think my wife and my kids are brilliant at sort of making me remember there's lots of other stuff going on in the world, and then I try and do a couple of things. I'm fortunate that I've got a big rescue dog, and so she needs taken out every day, so I'm out whatever the weather is, and then I also try and keep fit. So even when it's a bit rainy and a bit dark, I like running, so I go for a run, which makes me feel better. So it's the things that I think we know about, which is if you can do some form of exercise and get out, it's make sure you spend some time with your family and friends and do some good stuff. And then it's also that thing about the people you work with. So I think I'm really fortunate that all the senior team I work with, we look after each other and we challenge each other, and we make sure, that we are all behaving the best of our ability, but we also take care of each other. And so I think there's a lot of jobs that you can do that are really stressful. And ours is stressful, but there are lots of different jobs that are stressful. And I think the key thing is to make sure you've got a really good set of family and friends who look after you. And as I say, I'm very fortunate that I do have that.
Absolutely. It's about having those things in place that will make you feel better. Be it, as you said, going out, moving around, or having a strong set of friends that will make you feel better in those moments where you're really tired. So moving on to a question about technology. I think you talked about it before, but do you see technology changing your role? And if you do, in what way?
So technology is a really important part of the ambulance service. So obviously we've spoken already about how we need to sort of get from a telephone call to our vehicles, moving really quickly to where the patient needs us. So we have a lot of really big, very powerful computers that help sort of guide us to the patients and help us make some really good decisions. But even in the last few years since I've been in the ambulance service, we've massively changed a lot of the way we use technology. So in order to be able to help patients, we now have moved into writing paper records. So, what we found and what we've done, we used to do that on paper. We now have become completely digital. So each member of everybody on the ambulances, on the rapid response vehicles, all have iPads and mobile phones. And as I say, we use those not only to write what we've done, but when we arrive to a patient's house or whether they're in schools, whatever, when we get there, there's information on there that helps us make good decisions. So it'll tell us about, maybe what's happened to you in the past. It will give us your medical history. It may tell us you've had a really bad reaction to a drug or an allergy. It will tell us about maybe the medicines you're on. So it really helps us make better decisions. But we can also use that technology, to make referrals. So sometimes when we go and see patients, actually they need community teams, or they might need to see a GP, and we can start now using technology to directly talk to, say, a GP, or try and get an appointment with a GP. So we're starting to be able to join up all the different parts of the NHS, and then the different technology that we use in terms of how we, for example, would measure blood pressures or measure oxygen levels. We've got much more sophisticated machines that allow us to do that, and they're getting smaller and really, really powerful. And they make us, again, they can look at, for example, you may see that when we have somebody who's got heart problems, we can print out, it's called an ECG, but it's a printed piece of paper that shows us kind of the heart rhythm and rate, and it can tell us a lot of information. And now that, again, we can have computers that help look at those patterns and start to tell us what might be happening. So quite often now we can print off that piece of paper, or actually we can see it on a screen, and there's a very clever computer behind it that says, you know what, have you thought this might be a heart attack, or this might be this, or might be that? So the technology is rapidly changing, but at the end of all of this, healthcare is still people interacting with one another. So as much as it's brilliant that we've got much more an advanced technology, that's only as good as the paramedics and the technicians and the call handlers out there. So I think it's a really important balance. We need really good technology, but we need really, really good people to help use that technology.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Chris. And we have time for one last question before we move on to your closing thoughts. And it's a very nice one. The question is, who is your inspiration?
Well, that's not a question I thought I was going to get. I think what I would say is the reason I love doing this job, and I want to keep doing it even when it gets really difficult, is because I know it could be my family and friends that need the 999 service. So I think I would say actually it's my mum, because my mum's now 81 now. And I know that sort of her friends and family, as unfortunately as they get older, are much more likely to need the NHS. And so I want to be part of an NHS that really protects those who need it. And so whilst I'm fortunate that my mum is well, I know that some of her neighbours have needed us. And I know sadly sometimes the team I run and work with, we haven't always got to them as quickly as I like. So I'm kind of constantly reminded that, the reason I need to do the best I possibly can is because it's actually my own family that need the service that I provide. And then I guess when I get older and I'm no longer working in the ambulance service, I want the people younger than me to look after me as I get older. So I think my inspiration really is knowing that actually everything I do potentially, can help my own family and friends, and that's all the inspiration I really need.
That's really wonderful. Thank you, Chris. So now is the time for you to say if you have any closing thoughts for the young people joining us today.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of things written about the NHS at the moment, which I accept it. It's not always an easy place to be in the NHS. We've got a lot of challenges, but I will say that over all the years I've worked for the NHS, I've genuinely loved every minute of it, and I think it's a really important part of who we are and what we do in this country. I think to be able to help those who need health and healthcare is really important. I think it's a sign of a really good society, and it's something I'm really proud of and really keen to promote. So I think those people who are watching and listening, I think you do need to do your research. I'm not saying it's easy being part of the NHS, but I think if you spend some time talking to different people in the NHS, I think all of them are really proud of working for the NHS and have joined it for various reasons, but usually because they do want to make sure the NHS continues and grows and gets better. So as I say, I think, if you're watching this and listening to this, I would really thoroughly recommend, joining the NHS, and particularly obviously the ambulance service. So do have a look and do look at our website and do ask questions, because as I say, I genuinely think it's been an absolute privilege to continue to be part of a fabulous NHS.